Chapter we're gonna go over intelligence, and hopefully you guys had the opportunity to take your assessment to find out what type of intelligence, or where you fall as far as intelligence. But I want you to think about, like, in the past and just over the years, there have been very huge controversies regarding debates and things like that, um, regarding mental capacity and intelligence. I want you to think about these questions that they have here, or the first question: what is intelligence? Is it just merely your IQ? Is it how you perform in school, or is there more to it? We're also going to talk about assessing intelligence, the dynamics of intelligence, and then some genetic and environmental influences on intelligence. And is totally different than I'm sure a lot of you probably thought, but intelligence is the ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use knowledge to adapt to new situations. And general intelligence, according to Spearman, under it underlies specific mental abilities, and then basically is therefore measured by every task on an intelligence list. Going back to just intelligence in general, intelligence, back in the day, my day, I feel like it was more so about book smarts, about school smarts, but it's not really measured like that. It's your ability to learn from everyday experience, take any issues maybe within that experience, and be able to kind of solve those issues, and then also using it to be able to adapt to new situations, and that is totally different, right? Than what you would have probably thought the definition was. But Spearman said humans have one general intelligence that is the heart of everything a person does. Mental abilities are like physical abilities, which I think are true as well. Intelligence involves distinct abilities which correlate enough to define a small general intelligence factor. Gardner also, Gardner and Sternberg discount this theory as and propose several different kinds of intelligences. And the Sternberg's three intelligences is analytical, creative, and practical intelligence, and we'll get into those all in the next slide. Gardner's multiple intelligence, it basically identified eight uh, independent intelligences. And basically, the intelligence consists of multiple abilities that come in different packages. And those include verbal and mathematical aptitudes assessed by standard tests. They actually even found that multiple intelligences found in people with the savant syndrome, and autism spectrum disorder. So basically, um, these individuals had an island of brilliance, but would often score low on the intelligence test. I don't know um, if you remember the Rain Man. Um, Basically, what he had, they say he didn't have autism disorder, but maybe some sort of developmental disorder, I'm assuming. But so he was able to memorize like 9,000 books, Shakespeare, the Bible. He could even give you GPS, like travel directions within pretty much any major U.S. city. So he was pretty cool. Not He may not have been able to button his clothes, but or like follow normal traditional social cues and things like that. But he could remember the Gettysburg Address. Um, he could, memorize speeches and things like that. He was a brilliant, brilliant person. So Sternberg talked about the three intelligences. He talked about analytical intelligence, which is basically those tests that we take in grade school, and basically what they'll do is they assess well-defined problems and have a straight right answer or a single right answer. And these tests will predict how well you do in school, though, reasonably, and also how you'll do in the working world, so vocational success, but it's more modest when it comes to the vocational success. So it kind of predicts grades and it kind of predicts vocational success, if that makes sense, right? So creative intelligence, and when I hear creative intelligence, I'm thinking a lot about someone who is maybe a barber or a stylist or someone who draws, who can sing, things like that. However, creative intelligence is the ability to generate novel ideas, um, and come up with different things, like innovative, someone that's like super innovative. And I actually thought about the three intelligences, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have so many friends who may not perform very well on tests, but they have like so many cool ideas. And even though I have my PhD, super proud of having my PhD, you can be talented and make money by being innovative, by having those cool ideas, those trailblazing smarts. Sorry, my kids in the background, but practical intelligence is required for everyday tasks that may be poorly defined and may have multiple solutions. So street smarts, skills at handling everyday tasks. I consider this person to be a resourceful person. Someone's ability to be able to kind of adapt to like what's going on around them. Um, Multiple abilities can contribute to life success and differing varieties of giftedness. So whether that is you creating an amazing idea, or the fact that you know how to get, if you gotta like go and create something, like in Charleston, you'll see a lot of the young adults, they'll make baskets out of, I can't think of the type of tree, but either way they get out there and they basically make money off of something that was free, was from the land. So it's just something to think about when you think about intelligence. It's not about who makes the A's. It's not about, that IQ test. It could be the fact that you are practical. You are, you have that ability to generate novel ideas. So there are just a few differences that they have, and they also agree a lot on things as well. But Gardner identified 8 independent intelligences, and he put them in domains as differentiated multiple abilities. Sternberg agrees with the concept, but he proposes only 3 intelligences. Where they agree is the multiple abilities contribute to life successes, and we know that. And different varieties of giftedness provide educational challenges for education. So basically, Gardner had 8, Sternberg had 3. They both believed in multiple abilities, and that the different varieties of giftedness provide educational challenges, and special education, and a lot of those students being gifted in some areas but struggling, maybe in some areas of learning, definitely would be a challenge for some educators. Everybody isn't going to agree on the multiple intelligence theories, but when every pretty much success is basically being where you want to be in life, in a sense, right? But um, success is not just one ingredient. It takes a lot of things. Successful people tend to be those that are aware, very well connected to those around them, and then just they have the ability to withstand, to be energetic. I believe, and the book backs me up on this, when it comes to success, it's definitely a gift of nature, but it's a whole lot of nurture. So yeah, you can have a gift of being a good baseball player, but what are you doing to nurture that gift? Are you practicing every day? Are you, going to the batting cage? Are you doing conditioning for your body? So you have to take those things into consideration. It definitely does predict performance, but it doesn't say what'll happen once you get there, right? So those are just some criticisms of multiple intelligence theories. Uh, Jay Zagorski basically did an experiment where he tracked about 7,000 plus individuals, and after about 25 years, and then he looked at them in a longitudinal study of 25 years, a very long study. I'm very surprised he was able to keep track of all of them, but um, it did show that the higher your intelligence was, the more you would make as far as your income. But it wasn't much. So if you look at someone, um, maybe in the 110s compared to those in 125, it's not much of a difference. So it is a moderate positive correlation, um, but it's proven, it's shown that the higher your IQ or the scores on your intelligence test, the more money you'll make. But once you start getting up there, it's not much of a difference between 110 to 130. Just you can clearly see that on the graph or the figure 10.2. So there are four components to emotional intelligence. For some reason, I went back and I didn't see that I had a recording for this, but people who are good at perceiving emotions, so being able to see something in someone's face, like, hey, is everything okay? Like I can hear, they can hear it in music, they're able to pull it out of stories. They Those individuals have the ability to understand emotions, so predict them, how it could change a situation, how it can make a situation better, blend the situation, and also managing emotions, so knowing how to express them in varied situations. One thing about individuals who are emotionally intelligent is they do well. They do well in relationships. They have stable mental health. They tend to be healthier and happier individuals overall. But um, you know, putting it all together, emotional intelligence is the ability to perceive, understand, manage, and use emotions. Um, you know, and those individuals, like I said, are typically successfully professionally and have greater personal success as well. There are a few ways to assess intelligence. I'm saying technology, but assessing intelligence. First is the intelligence test, which is a method for assessing individuals' mental aptitude and comparing them with those of others using numerical scores. So, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Stanford Binet or the Wechsler's adult intelligence test. Those are ways to kind of check the IQ of those individuals, see how well they're functioning on that level. Now, an aptitude test would be like an SAT or an LSAT or ACT. It predicts a person's future performance moderately, right? And then the achievement test is very similar, but it's actually looking at the way that you kind of perform in your personal and professional lives. So, a few examples are like a test assessing an individual's aptitude to become a fighter pilot, or a career test. An aptitude test is given to high school students to determine which type of career they might be good at. A computer programming test to see how well a job candidate might solve some different hypothetical questions. These tests can sometimes give a general idea of what might interest students as a future career, or just people in general. But unlike achievement tests, which are concerned with looking at a person's level of skill or knowledge at any given time, and aptitude tests are instead like focused on determining how capable of a person, or how capable that person might be at performing a certain task. So that would be like the difference between an achievement and an aptitude test. And we've gone over the difference in aptitude and intelligence, but here, like, aptitude predicts your ability to learn a new skill. An intelligence test assesses your mental aptitudes, right? And compare those to others. But here you'll see that there is a close correlation between intelligence scores and your verbal and quantitative SAT scores. Francis Galton, actually, he was a English scientist. He was actually related to Charles Darwin, which is pretty cool. But basically, he wanted to find out about human traits. So he wanted to measure human traits. And what was it was kind of like one of those things where he wanted to look at the intellectual strengths. They were based on reaction time, sensory acuity, muscular power, and body proportions. And even though, he did these studies, the measures were well regarded, but the students did not outscore others, nor was there any correlation. So, because there weren't any correlation between measures, it provided no statistical techniques. Um, but even though like his quest for simple intelligence failed, he gave us statistical techniques that we use. We call them nature versus nurture. So I mean, there was some pretty cool. I liked what he was trying to do, but unfortunately, there were no statistical techniques. Benet, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He was a French theorist, and basically, what he did is he wanted to um, measure each child's mental age. So he actually did tests on his two daughters, um, and he did tests on his two daughters. They answered many questions. The items answered correctly could then basically predict how well other French children would handle their schoolwork. He had one single practical purpose for this. It wasn't to measure success in life, but it was just to identify French school children needing special attention. His hope was to improve education for each child and not limit their opportunities. So that was pretty dope, right? Even back then. Lewis Terman actually took Benet's test, and then he extended the upper end of the test range. So that's why you don't see Benet. It's Stanford Benet, right? So what he did is he okay. So the IQ was simply a person's mental age divided by their chronological age and multiplied by 100 to get rid of the decimal point. Um, An average child whose mental and chronological ages are the same has an IQ of 100, but an 8-year-old who answers questions as would a typical 10-year-old would have an IQ of 125. He has what you call the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or the Wechsler's test for children. So this is actually the most widely used test today. You'll still see the Stanford Binet being used, but this is what you'll see on most standard psychological educational evals, just to kind of determine where that child lies. It looks at overall intelligence. It separates scores from verbal, comprehensive, perceptual organization, working memory, and processing speed. And it definitely will give you insight on someone's strengths or weaknesses. Um, Benet would probably have been horrified that his test had been adapted and used to draw, like, some of the conclusions that Terman came up with. But even Terman came to appreciate that test scores reflected not only people's innate mental abilities, but also their education, their native language. Um, so, Benet wanted more of the test to help kids and not limit their abilities. But a lot of times, the Terman envisioned that the use of intelligence tests would ultimately result in curtailing the reproduction of feeble-mindedness and in the elimination of an enormous amount of crime and all that stuff during that time. He was hoping that it would rid that. But Benet probably wouldn't be on board with that, which kind of sucks that your test got used for something totally different from what you envisioned it to be used for. So there are three criteria of good test. It needs to the test has to be standardized. So the test makers need to give the test to a representative sample of people. The scores from those people would be the basis for the future comparisons. And this process is called standardization, right? And then you wonder, like, is the test reliable? Is the test valid, right? So the test definitely has to show that the reliability of the assessment. So the reliability of the assessment tool is the extent to which it measures learning consistently, right? Or it measures whatever it's trying to pull consistently. The validity of an assessment tool is the extent by which it measures what it was designed to measure. Okay. And like I said earlier, defining uniform testing procedures and meaningful scores by comparison. Reliability is extent to which a test yields consistent results, whether it's taken in the morning, whether it's taken at night, that it yields consistent results. And then validity is it measuring what it's supposed to measure. Okay, content validity, which is a little bit different. It's the extent to which a test samples the behavior that is of interest. So in the book, it talks about the road test for a driver's license has content validity because it samples the task a driver routinely faces. Course exams have content validity if they assess one's mastery of a course, but we expect intelligence tests to have predictive validity. They should predict the criterion of future performances, and to some extent they do. So, predictive validity, success with which a test predicts the behavior it is designed to predict, assessed by computing the validity. Figure here is just showing that the average score for the Wechsler is about 100, but as you can see, people are all the way far left and all the way far right. But the average, what you need to know about this is the average score is 100. Wechsler found that there's a decline of mental ability with age. It's just a part of the process of aging the organism overall. But they said that it's not until you're like way up in age, like in your 80s. So even those who may be older, even if they're in good health, they have the ability to be able to learn. That whole thing, you can't teach a old dog new tricks, is out the window. We know that that isn't true. So, in June 1st, 1932, every child in the country born in 1921 This was in Scotland. Around the age of 11, they took an intelligence test. And according to Ian Deary, they actually found that the stability of children at the age of 11 pretty much is consistent throughout the rest of their lives. So that's why they did it on children who were 11. So later on down the line, Patricia Wally, the wife of Deary's coworker, found the test. She found them in a test, like dusty old test room, and was like, "Oh snap, we got something," because now it's been about 65 years, and so they were able to test a lot of the survivors. They actually were able to test 542 of the survivors. They were 80 plus years old, right? Um, and had very, very like diverse life experiences. But what they found is from the age of at least 11 to 70, it confirmed the stability of intelligence independent of life circumstances. And those individuals, those children and adults or children and adults who are more intelligent also tend to live healthier and longer lives. And some people think that, intelligence facilitates more education, better jobs, healthier environment. Intelligence also encourages healthy living, so not smoking, better diet, more exercise, because you know better, right? You're intelligent, right? So, prenatal events or early childhood illnesses might have influenced both intelligence and health. And a well wired body, as evidenced by fast reaction speeds, perhaps fosters both intelligence and longevity. And that's actually on page 375 of chapter 10. It gives you all four of those. So, yeah. Here it's just saying before um, the age of 3, it modestly predicts the future. 4, um, intelligence tests begin to predict adolescents and adult scores, but then it's better like that 11-year-old. Um, it shows that the remarkable stability, and that's just kind of like what I've explained. And in the next slide, it goes over the Deary and the Johnson study, with the children who were tested at the age of 11 and tested 65 years later. So it gives you that information there. Okay, it's telling you about the extremes of intelligence, and it's the best way to evaluate the validity and significance of any test is to compare people who score at the two extremes of the normal curve. So at the lower extreme, and then those are at the higher extreme. So we're going to get into that. Now, the lower extreme of intelligence would look like someone with some sort of learning disability, 70 or below, 2 standard deviations below average, which is really interesting because I will see someone who will come in with almost like a math disability, but excel in everything else. So I wonder how that kind of works with that. But either way, these individuals who are typically on the lower end of things struggle with those executive functioning, the independent living skills, and malforms intellectual disabilities like normal intelligence. They kind of come from genetics and sometimes even environmental factors. Now, Down syndrome is a condition of mild to severe intellectual disability. They typically have an extra copy of chromosome 21. One thing about individuals with Down syndrome, no matter race, you know, um, or culture, or whatever you take into consideration, they have like very distinct facial features, typically a flatter face, smaller necks, and things like that, to kind of make they're very distinct looking. So, um, Yeah, so even if they like, you could tell they come from like a certain family, you can see like some of those facial features, but then they still have those distinct ones as well. But the U.S. Supreme Court said that the cutoff intelligence scores would be 70. So if you score just above 70 on such tests, to consider other evidence, like if someone committed a crime or something like that, and they fell within the lower extreme of intelligence, they may be able to consider taking that person off death row or dropping the charges because maybe that person didn't know any better, right? You hear my husband screaming in the background. It's just him fussing at the kids, but either way, whatever. Um, Terman studied that higher scoring children were healthy, well adjusted, and unusually successfully academically. Um, and that might be true. It could be like the self fulfilling prophecy where, someone kind of puts you in a position and you fulfill exactly what was expected of you, right? And so those that may come from minority or low income backgrounds may be placed in a lower academic group, promoting segregation and prejudice and them like self-fulfilling. Obviously they weren't expected to do much, so I don't know if that's the case. So I wonder if they took a child that didn't perform well but was placed in those courses and placed in those experiences, would they have performed differently? I mean, I'm sure they've probably done that, but I haven't seen any studies on it. But they have some critics, of course, question the percentage of gifted children, and their tracking by aptitude suggests enriched gifted education, in that, you know, widening educational gaps. Agree that children have different gifts that are well served with appropriate developmental placement. It's so important, just as a parent, not to compare your children because there's so many different types of intelligences, right? There's music, there's dance, there is the ability to understand and like have compassion. Like it's so many different things to think about, and so just because that child doesn't perform well on the math assignment, they may pick up an instrument and kill it. So it's very important not to um, totally like separate them from in an academic perspective, but nurture the gifts that they're showing, and then also of course work on the things that they may struggle with, but nurture those gifts those things that they're interested in. Seems like in this course we're always talking about twins, multiples, but it's important to know, especially from a psychological perspective. You can just learn so much from them. But do people who share the same genes also share mental ability? Yeah, we already know that, right? So intelligence test scores of identical twins raised together are nearly as similar as those of the same person taking the same test twice, right? Cool, right? So this is just a graph kind of showing you what it would be like if someone that identical twins raised together took a test, or those that were identical twins raised apart. Even though they're raised apart, it's pretty close, right? Then there's a lower correlation for those who are fraternal, and then siblings raised together and unrelated individuals raised together. It definitely shows you a great difference from um, unrelated individuals to like identical twins raised together. It's like almost half or more of that, right? It's at 85 and that's at 31, 32 percent. So that's like almost 50% more of you having a similarity of intelligence. Pretty cool. So environmental influences when it comes to intelligence. There's a government funded program that served probably over like 30 plus million children. It's called Head Start, and it contributes to later health and high school completion rates, but they if you're not nurtured over time, the aptitude benefits can fade. Iowa, you probably have heard them say growth mindset a million times, but basically, it's the growth mindset shows that you're not just gonna say what you can't do. Growth mindset is basically believing in yourself that you can accomplish and achieve goals. So it fosters with the belief that intelligence is changeable, right? Increase when effort rather than ability is encouraged, and it actually made teens more resilient when frustrated by others. So ability plus opportunity plus motivation equals success. The good stuff, gender similarities and differences in intelligence scores. Gender differences are fairly minor. However, um, effects of culture, social expectations, and opportunities matter. There's little gender gap found in gender equal cultures, but there are some group differences for sure. Most people find differences more newsworthy. Girls outpace boys in spelling. Boys outperform girls in spatial ability and math problems. Um, but social influences also construct gender. Social expectations, for men to go into construction or to into engineering or math-based things, and then for women to be in the service or helping profession, things like that. So it just kind of depends on your culture. Let's talk about test bias or bias in general. Um, the scientific meaning of bias is based on the test predictive validity. So if a test does not accurately predict future behavior for all groups of test takers is biased. So, like, remember with standardization, you're taking a sample group, but if that sample group doesn't represent everybody that's taking the test, then the test then is biased, right? A test can also be biased if it detects not only innate differences in intelligence, but also performance differences caused by cultural experiences. A lot of times, white men are creating these standardized tests, and if they're basing things on their cultural experiences, then a black male or an Asian female taking this test may struggle with those things because the cultural experiences don't match. Self-fulfilling stereotype threat. It is a self-confirming concern that one will be evaluated based on negative stereotypes. Um, and basically, a stereotype threat may impair attention, performance, and learning. So they actually, Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson, and Spencer, I believe, observed the self-fulfilling stereotype threat when black students performed worse after being reminded of their race just before taking verbal aptitude tests. Crazy, right? Women do not perform as well as men on difficult math tests unless told. Women usually do as well as I guess men on the test. And then yeah, so those self-fulfilling things that are innate that you kind of already know, then someone comes and then they confirm it or change your thoughts about it, you tend to perform better or worse depending on the circumstances. We know about the self-fulfilling stereotype threat, but when it comes to test takers' expectation, a stereotype threat does not fully account for black white aptitude score differences or the gender gap in high level math achievements. However, it does address why blacks score higher when tested by blacks, and that could be potentially, having maybe having experience with a white teacher or a black teacher, and the perhaps the white teacher having lower expectations for the student and the black teacher actually having higher expectations for that student. They talk about the Obama effect, and during the time of election, especially those who were raised while they were younger children and they were raised into adulthood, and they saw Obama, a black man that was a president, it was almost like the sky is the limit, the Obama effect. I actually didn't know much about that until like a few years ago. I mean, I felt it, um, you know, um, but I didn't know what the name that was an actual term for it. But conclusion, aptitude tests are not biased in a scientific sense, but are bias related to insensitivity to differences caused by cultural experiences. And that is so true. I mean, yeah, it does work in a practical sense, and they have shown to be valid and reliable over time. But I do think that um, it reflects only one aspect of personal competence. Um, there's so many other things to look at when it comes to intelligence, creativity, talent, character. Um, those things are great. And I just think about myself and um, you know having to take all those math classes, all the foreign languages, and the stats and the research, and putting together like 100-ish page dissertation, presenting in front of people across the United States at different conferences, um, but not having great test scores. But when it came down to it, like actually sitting down and explaining, because that's how it is in the PhD program. You when you take exams, a lot of the times it's over the things that you remember, not necessarily like multiple choice, but you're writing down ideas and making those things make sense. You're doing critical thinking, because just even with y'all, when you do multiple choice, a lot of times when you think critically, like you're like, oh no, I think A and B could actually work for this, which the way you're tested in a 4-year bachelor's program, there's one answer, and that's the answer that you need to look for. But once you get into your master's and your PhD, you have the ability to tell them why, and which I think that gives you an opportunity to show those different intelligences. It's really dope. But this is just something to think about, especially if as you decide your majors, if you decide to go into education, or working with students from lower income, socioeconomic levels. You don't, just because you feel like somebody isn't performing at the same level, it doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. It might mean that they have a different intelligence, and you have to find it and nurture it. So this week, on Friday, you will start your exam. It'll start at 9 a.m. And you'll have until 11:59 on Sunday to finish your exam. Um, and there will be a quiz for this week. I may back off and not have you do a discussion, so that way you can focus on studying for your exam. We will do, a review in class this week. It should cover the last 3 chapters. Well, I'll try to squeeze as many questions as I can in there. Please, pay attention when we're doing our reviews. Show up when we're doing our reviews, because it makes it very difficult for me when it's time, when you haven't shown up for anything, and then you're like, so what's the extra credit we're doing? Don't ever ask me about what extra credit we're doing. If you weren't there, that's like a perk of being in class. So make sure you're there. It's short. It's 1 day a week. Gives you time to get out, get some fresh air, breathe for a minute. Learn a little bit extra maybe on the review. But yeah, so this week we have our exam. There will um, be a quiz over this section. No discussion, and I think that's it. If you have any questions, you know where I am, and I'll see you guys soon.